everybody. Welcome back to the Solganize Your Life podcast. I'm super excited, really excited to have the guest today, Colin McDonald from Knot Therapy. He's the co-founder of Knot Therapy with Haley. And Colin, what we do here on the podcast is really straightforward. We just talk about how the outer circumstances of our life will stimulate our inner environment in two very distinct ways. The first way is through, as a therapist, what I would call the psychological ego. And the second way is what I would call our divine soul connection to all that is. And why do I think it's important to know the difference as a therapist? Well, that's where you come in as co-founder of Knot Therapy to talk a little bit deeper about your own journey as to how you have integrated these two very distinct perspectives into one full, beautiful, messy human experience. So, Colin, thank you so much again for being here. And please finish introducing yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much, Wynn. I've also been really looking forward to this. But yeah, my name's Colin. I am the co-founder of Knot Therapy Coaching. We're a mentorship, non-therapeutic approach to just having someone that's walked in your shoes, that is a couple years older than you, has the lived experience to connect with teens and young adults who are, kind of in a failure to launch stage. Maybe their parents are thinking about sending them to a treatment program, or they're in the process of transferring out. So we offer peer-to-peer mentorship. All of our mentors and coaches have gone through the same experience as our clients. And, we found that between therapy and not therapy, sometimes the people that we work with just want to know that the person on the other side of the conversation has the same experience as them and the same life experience, and can say that, I've walked in your shoes.
Yes. And I would say that I felt so blessed to hear about you by accident in a therapy session with a client who was talking to me about exactly what you said, a lived experience, right? It's like going through all of these things with their child and saying, like, who is going to understand my kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so something we talked about before is like, it's not what is the next step for someone when they're quote unquote treatment resistant. What I don't believe in that, but the fact that who is going to love my kid and why, right? Who is going to invest and it has to be somebody with lived experience, in my opinion. I can sit all day with someone and talk about an evidence-based treatment, right, that works, but as you and I both know, it doesn't always work.
Yeah.
And it's so important. And even if it did work, there's still a little handing off that could happen, where that person doesn't feel like, they just came home from war and like, how do I interact with regular, everyday life? So I'm so thankful that you guys did this both as a therapist and a mother. And I'm curious a little bit, again, as a therapist, to hear about how you developed into the ego that was struggling, right? How you had this mental, separation of self, where like I'm all alone and no one can help me and I'm on my own and I have to do something to help myself, but couldn't figure out quite what that was. Like, what was that like for you as a kid?
Yeah, so the kind of the beginning of the journey, and from just like the mental health standpoint, I started out just kind of struggling with ADHD and anger management, and got into therapy right around fourth grade. And then, of course, my parents kind of were taking the typical route and went from there to getting medicated for my ADHD. But I feel like, this was in the late 2008, 2009, 2010. Once that started working, I was just acting out more. And I would say for me, what started coming up was just like not doing well in school. I was a little bit different where, it wasn't so much the social stuff and I was really into sports, had a lot of friends, but just like not being able to focus on something that was actually moving my life forward, and like looking at the bigger picture of someone who's, you're not really going to understand the picture in middle school, but once you get into high school, like I graduated from middle school, but then when I got into high school, all I cared about was my social life. And it really started to affect just like the dynamics at home. I'm also the oldest of three. And so, I feel like it's kind of the trial and error child, where you're just trying to figure it out, with them. And so my parents put so much attention on me and just trying to figure out what to do next. And that really led to, I had really bad anger management. I was failing out of school. I was sneaking out, taking my parents' car. I started smoking with weed and then continuing to experiment when I was in middle school. And so I think my parents, you know, they were going to therapists asking, what do we do with him? And then, of course, the therapist recommended me go to outpatient. So then I went to outpatient. And I feel like once I started getting into high school, then the depression really started. And a lot of it was tied to social situations. I always tell parents that when, you know, parents get so worried about the things that are going on in the world and thinking about how they're affecting their kid. But for me, it was about girls and things that were happening at school and just, you know, viewing my life crumbling when, you know, parents can have an outside perspective because they're much further along. But for me, you know, going through a breakup or having problems with a friend group or a person in school, like that actually was what was affecting me and thinking that my world was crashing down. And so then I became pretty depressed and went to 8 different psych wards my sophomore year in high school. And, you know, it was just like psych ward after psych ward. I'd come out for a week or two. And so then I started missing a bunch of school. And eventually that led to me going to a rehab. And that was because I ended up like trying to take my own life when I was a sophomore as well, and taking a bunch of pain medication and then having to go to the hospital, get my stomach pumped. And so then when I went to rehab, came out, and then was out for about 2 weeks, had a huge mental breakdown where my dad found me crying behind a school after I'd taken my mom's car out. And so that's when my parents learned about wilderness therapy. And for people that don't know about wilderness therapy, it's definitely a different type of therapy where, you know, your parents kind of don't really give you the truth about where you're going. And I'd been in so many treatment centers that I ended up, the next thing you know, I'm like in South Utah where I, you know, was blindfolded and driven out into the desert and then dropped off. And you enter into a group that is like kind of like the basic skills group, and then they take you to your real group. And I remember I got out there and I'm just with like 9 of the dirtiest and like guys who are 17 with full beards. And, you know, being from the suburbs of Bellevue, I was like, what is going on with my life? And that no one ever, like, I thought I was going to get out of there in 28 days. And they told me no one ever left before 90 days. And it's the first time where I like remember just breaking down and saying, you know, how did my life get to this point that I'm, you know, living in the desert, in the wilderness, and like, no, they don't even tell you what time of day, what day it is, what time it is. You wake up when the sun rises, hike every day, go to therapy. So it's definitely a really unique experience. And then from there, it's pretty typical that, especially back in this time frame, that they would send you to a therapeutic boarding school. And so I got sent to a therapeutic boarding school when I was 16 as well. Went straight from wilderness, and then ended up being in the therapeutic boarding school in North Idaho, where, you know, you went to therapy every day. There's about 60 of us living up in Ruby Ridge, which I know some of the listeners might have remembered when that whole fiasco happened. So it was literally that guy's like little shack and then my boarding school. So, yeah, it's definitely out there. And, you know, that when you get there, the intention of the boarding school was for me to graduate from high school there. So I ended up being there for 18 months and never got to go home. You don't have internet, don't have a phone, and you're really just kind of secluded from the world. And it was really challenging. You know, one of the stories I like to tell is I disliked it so much in my first 2 or 3 weeks that I escaped from the boarding school, jumped out the window in the mountains of North Idaho, and ended up walking like 160 miles and getting back to Spokane, and then got caught and had to go back, and ended up being there for a long time afterwards. So I know that's a long explanation, but it really does kind of at the root core of why Haley and I started Not Therapy was her and I had similar experiences growing up. And that was just like the beginning of the journey. And then I went straight off to college and had another set of challenges after that.
Yeah. So since, you know, I really like to help people watching understand what is the ego and how does it show up for someone. You know, when you go back to your youth, right? It's interesting. Like you said, you were very social and that was really important to you. And then your parents had this other viewpoint about school.
Yeah.
And it sounds like your ego sort of kept it together as long as what you cared about, which is the social aspect, was there. And what your parents maybe didn't understand at the time, or maybe you didn't understand either, was like, oh, when I lost the one thing my ego could count on, right? was this sense of belonging,
Yeah.
maybe, or the sense of being validated by right, a female
Others.
who you're
Yeah.
dating, right? You didn't know that your ego was struggling, right? And
Yeah.
then you started doing the behaviors, right? The outward behaviors that are so upsetting to parents, right? Who
Mhm.
are like, what is he doing?
Yeah.
And so if you go back like to those times, like if you could think of like that separate self that you developed of like, no one's going to understand me or nobody can help me.
Mhm.
I met Haley, it was just like, yeah, I'm not enough. I just felt like I wasn't enough. Like, did you sort of have that same statement in your head?
It wasn't even that I was not enough. I literally thought I was just like the coolest kid on earth. Like
And you
uh,
are.
yeah,
And you
yeah, thank you.
are. I agree.
But yeah, I just like thought I was like the man. And
Yeah.
it really came out too that a lot of the behaviors that I was doing were self-imposed. It was,
Mhm.
I was very well liked by girls and things when I was younger. And so I just like, all I cared about was the things that I was getting a lot of validation in.
Mhm.
And so that's just like where I was like, well, this feels way better than going to school or, hanging out with
Mhm.
the older kids and smoking weeds is a lot more fun than going to school or spending
Yeah.
time with my family. And so I think it was more so kind of like this mask I was wearing around, like almost being like a prodigal son or something like that. Like I was just like, and it was interesting too, because, and this came out when I was older, but I always knew that there was something like different about me and that people would always say, I've never met someone like you, you're so social, and it just like was something
Mm.
that came naturally to me. Like
Mhm.
it was just how I was like, I'm not really trying to put on a performance, I'm just naturally like being the center of attention. And
Mhm.
so I would say like that was really my ego, is just like being the center of attention, wanting everyone to like me, having
Sure.
lots of friends, which has served me in some ways, but as I've worked
Absolutely.
on
It
myself,
always does.
yeah,
And
exactly.
that's the thing about the ego, is it serves you until it doesn't,
Mm,
right? Like it did serve you when you were younger and created a lot of wonderful memories, I'm sure. And I'm sure your ego got addicted to those feelings, right? The ego is either pushing a negative feeling away or it's addicted to the positive feeling,
mhm,
right? And so it sounds like your ego sort of got addicted to the positive feeling of like, oh, people like me and I can, and I'm interesting to people and people compliment me. And then there was a point where that ego all of a sudden doesn't work anymore. You're in high school and you're breaking up, or people aren't understanding you or thinking you're special anymore. And then you go sideways, right?
exactly. Mhm.
Yeah. And then you go through this thing. So do you believe that when you were younger, did you have a sense that you were connected to something larger than yourself?
Mm,
Did you have a spirituality, or what, you didn't know where to turn in that?
yeah, I would say no, not at all. I grew up not religious, and for me, it was more just like maybe a sense of community, but not thinking like
Yes.
I wasn't thinking about going to college or anything like that, and I wasn't thinking about what I wanted to be when I was older. It was just like a
Yeah.
day to day, how can I hang out with my friends and still
Hmm.
play sports and but even like when I was like played a ton of sports when I was in high school and played like really competitive soccer. And the second that I wasn't the best player on the team, I would quit. Right. And so
Yeah.
it's like the same thing of like the second that I felt like it wasn't this like high that I was kind of chasing, then I would just quit it.
Mm-hmm, hmm. Yeah, so the ego sometimes will avoid negative experiences, right?
Mhm.
Which is a little bit more what Haley sounds like, but yours is more chasing the high,
Yeah.
right? And becoming addicted that way. And so at some point you realize it's not working. Well, your parents realized maybe it wasn't
Mhm.
working for you and you weren't willing. You're like, you escaped, right? Or you would get away from these experiences. And then you even got to the place where you're like, well, I don't even want to be here anymore, and
Yeah.
even considered taking your own life or attempted to.
Mhm.
And yeah, at that point, you do need to go into those spaces, where people can try to keep you safe. So I get sort of the journey that your parents kind of put you on. Um, do you remember during any of those times, wilderness or whatever, feeling a sense of interconnection? Like, oh, there is something more than this ego that can't stop chasing?
Yeah, I think I felt somewhat of a sense of purpose in the wilderness because
Mm.
you're sleeping on the dirt, you're going on 12-mile hikes, you're cooking your own meals, you're pooping in holes and just sleeping under the stars. And
Do you want me to
uh,
edit that out?
I mean, it's true. I'm being honest,
Pooping in holes.
and it was like the first time that I'd ever been so unplugged from the world. And I
Mm.
would say when I got to boarding school, I would tell people I'd much rather be in wilderness still than being at this boarding school.
Interesting.
But I will say one thing about the boarding school, and this is what I tell most of my clients as well, maybe when they're in the treatment experience, is when you're in treatment, you're unplugged from the world, and you can actually not just like go to the therapeutic part, but you can focus on something that you probably wouldn't be able to do where there's distractions like in the real world.
Yeah.
And so for me, what it did do is I got really physically fit, and was just working out because there wasn't much to do. I read like 300 books because we couldn't watch TV or have cell phones. And then I was able to get into college, which was just like not even on my radar. When I went into boarding school, I had like a 1.9, and I'm from the suburbs of Seattle, and everyone there went to my high school, went to college, and so getting into college, and I think I got into like 5 or 6 colleges. It did, it was something that I still had resentment for a long time, that my path looked a lot different than everyone else's, and I missed prom and didn't get to play high school sports really, and but I was able to get into college, and like colleges that my friends got into, and so getting the experience to go to college also like was something I didn't think that I'd be able to do, and so I feel like I did feel a sense of purpose of having the discipline to actually get into something that I didn't think I could do.
Yeah. So knowing that you didn't start Not Therapy right after that, how did your ego show up again? Like what parts of your ego took over your life again in a way that maybe made you think like, oh, something outside of me, college or this job or these things is going to complete me and make me feel that feeling again? Like, did you recognize that at all?
Yeah, it's funny. I would say one of the experiences that was both purpose driven, but then ended with the ego kind of taking over was when I was in college. I ended up graduating. When I first got there, it was really challenging. I got like a 0.9 GPA my first semester because I'd been in this environment where you don't do anything, and then all of a sudden I'm in a fraternity and partying all the time. So I think I went to class twice. But
okay, so your ego kind of fell into the fraternity.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is more important than class.
Yeah, but it did teach me about community because they did like hold me accountable to go into class and stuff. But what I was going to say was towards the end of college, my dad asked me, what I wanted to do with my life, and I didn't know. I was just getting a communication degree, and he asked me what I loved, and I said I love the Seattle Mariners baseball team. And so I like made this goal, and it was the first, and every day I went to a college admission counselor. They were like, we don't know how to do it, but here's some internships. And so then I went on this path of like going for what I thought my purpose was work for my favorite baseball team, what dreams are made of. And I worked in indoor football, minor league baseball, college athletics, and then eventually for the Seattle Mariners. And I feel like my ego really wanted people to be like, wow, look at Colin. He just got out of college. He's working for the Seattle Mariners, and
he figured it out.
He figured it out. Look where he came from. And then when it all of a sudden like wasn't fulfilling this like high that I was chasing, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And then I just kind of started this endless cycle of working in the tech industry, going from tech sales job to tech sales job, and until after a while where I kind of got to the point of like wanting to really find what my life's purpose was.
Yeah. And did you have another like drop, the drastic drop that you had as a child, or was there another way your soul kind of cracked you open and said, hey, Colin, let's figure this out?
Yeah. So when I was about 28, so right when your like Saturn's return begins, I was working in tech and I was living in Denver.
I love how you just said that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I totally believe in that. Yeah.
I learned about human design around that time too. And that's when I was like,
in numerology, it's around 27 because it's every 9 year cycles. And so I really do think I had an awakening at that age too.
Yeah.
Like there's something to that. And I think our souls were like, all right, Colin, stop screwing around.
Exactly. And so I was living in Denver, and I was dating this girl that I moved up to Denver for. And I got pretty overweight. I wasn't working out. I was just like in a tech sales job, making good money, but didn't really like love it. And then I had just moved to Denver with her, or she lived there and I moved in with her. And in like a 3-week time period, my grandma passed away, who was like one of the most important people in my life. I just moved to Denver, just started a new job, and then ended up breaking up with the girl, and we thought we were going to get married. And so that wasn't like a 3-week time period. And I was like, oh man, what's going on? Like, this
Hmm.
is really uncomfortable. I was super sad. And at the time, the tech company I worked for, the CEO was very into like self-improvement and life coaching. And so she paid for anyone who is a leader in the company or like an early employee to get life coaching from this program that I was a part of. And I got on the first call and I was kind of felt this like yearning for more. And just listening to the guy who was leading it with all the leaders, I thought to myself, like, this is kind of what I'm wanting to do, what is this thing?
Hmm.
And not even like for work, but just this feels right to me. And so then after being on a couple of those calls, I ended up going to my first self-help retreat. So I went to a
Mm,
retreat in the Redwood Forest, and it
nice.
just blew my mind. It was the first time I did breath work and did shadow work and parts work all in like a 5-day period. And I came out of there just being like, this is the path I want to be on, is this like,
Mhm.
I call it my self-improvement movement. Like, I just really wanted to start working on myself. And once you get
Yeah.
into the self-improvement space, so much of it is about finding your purpose. And
Yes.
so then a couple months after that, things started getting better. I was feeling good about my life, but tech just wasn't really feeling like the thing. And so I ended up getting let go from the company just because we were going through like our fourth round of layoffs. And so the guy who ran the life coaching company told me, don't worry about, because I was just applying for new jobs. He's like, don't worry about getting a new job. Like, you've had a pretty successful career. See who's going to like open up to you. And so I ended up, once I got let go, the idea of starting, wanting to be a life coach kind of popped in my mind. And then the guy who ran the life coaching company hired me to be like a sales facilitator person. And so I started doing that. And while that happened, it didn't really work out. I wasn't making very much money. And I ended up getting in over the next 7-8 months, like into about $40,000 in debt. And I wasn't making money, but I felt like I was chasing my purpose. And during that time period is when I came up with the
Mhm.
idea of, I want to help people that have gone through the same situation as me, like
Mm.
helping the younger versions
Yeah.
of myself. And it really came down to, I was in so much debt. I was feeling so unaligned and panicking, honestly, and it was super uncomfortable. It was probably the first big dip I had had since I'd gone to treatment. Uh,
Yeah.
and I brought up this idea of like helping people that have been through my situations, this 16 to 22-year-olds. And my parents were like, we think that's what you're supposed to do. Like, you've always
Yeah.
really wanted to do that. And so um, I just started networking a bunch with like people that I had worked in my treatment facilities. And I got an opportunity to go to Spain and be a life coach at a gap year program for 18-year-olds. And I went into that life coaching program in a ton of debt. And by the time I came out of it in the like almost 4 months I was there, I met Haley and we created Not Therapy. And so that was like where I really, trusted my purpose and like pushed my
Mhm.
ego aside. And like, I think
Mhm.
this is what I was put on the earth to do. And
Yeah.
haven't looked back, and my life has completely changed since then.
Yeah. So that was, it sounds like the first time that you sat in your negative emotions, right? And
Mhm.
you said, okay, I'm not going to let the ego push me again to
Mhm.
strive for that or chase for that. And you let that sit. And it sounds like you let your soul sort of enter and speak to you and say, hey, maybe this is what you're actually supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and during that time period where I was figuring out, like, I was very committed to, like, I had a life coach. I was in
Hmm.
a bunch of communities, and I remember
Yeah.
being in those communities, and there would be like these super successful entrepreneurs in there, and I would think to myself, like, these people aren't that different than me. They just have this like modality, this like engine that is helping them get to where they want to be, and I need to figure out what mine is.
Yeah.
And so, I was like going to retreats every 3 months. So I was really doing the work on myself, and I just
Yeah.
didn't know what the purpose part of it was. And I think too, when you're in a ton of debt and, you're essentially unemployed, kind of working for a life coaching company, your ego definitely comes up of like, wow, you're so far behind all your friends.
Yeah.
What are you doing? I was like living in the Redwood Forest, just like sauning and cold punching and
Yeah.
meditating every day. And so, it didn't make sense to me, but something was calling me of just like, just keep doing what you're doing and it's going to pay off.
Yeah. One thing I didn't talk to Haley about, which I think you're just kind of brought up is, I think our souls need a really good base, right? A body to enact itself, right? If it's full of drugs or if it's not working out or if it's not doing something very intentional every day to like care for this vessel that we're in. And like you said, there was a point where you like, I got overweight. I was just working. My ego just kind of took over my brain. Like, how have you realized through Knot Therapy and like working with your clients that the body is really a big part of them finding their soul and working past the ego?
Yeah, I think when people think about making big changes, they overcomplicate it. And, we view with our clients that they already have the answers within them and we're just guides to get them there. And so when we start working with a client, and this is what I did with myself, I would do this exercise and I just say, what does a good day look like? What are 5 things that if I did them every day, I would feel like I had a successful day? And for me, that was get 8 hours of sleep, get 10,000 steps a day, work out 1 time, drink a gallon of water, and work on my business, even if it was just send an email. And when I really started building momentum in my life and then in Knot Therapy was when I just focused on the daily inputs. And it's like one of those things. I was actually in church last week and they were just talking about like discipline and just like being disciplined is actually kind of the key to going after your purpose, because you're not going to see the results until much further down the line. But if you can be disciplined and, like what that exercise was all about in the daily things and putting in the inputs, you're just going to feel better and feel more grounded. And then of course, as you learn more, those things expand, breath work. And I do a lot of parts work with my life coach, who is like a master psychologist as well. And so for me, just like the more I prepared my vessel and during that time when I was, going through the big kind of awakening I began, I also was really into working out. I lost like 27 pounds and it just like I feel like with anxiety, right? If you're not feeling good about what you're doing on a daily basis and when you look at yourself in the mirror, you're of course going to just like have anxiety about the future and have anxiety about, who you are. Right.
Yes. Yeah. And I would say that the point of this podcast is to help people integrate, right? You are human, but you're also a being or a soul, right? And your soul wants to have the practical everyday experience of feeling healthy in a body, of, like you said, a consistent effort towards a mission or a purpose rather than, feeling, only if chasing good feelings through success or results, right? That you see quickly, which you won't, versus or being adverse to, I can't feel any negative feeling at all. And it sounds like what you've realized over time is like, there is a way for me to integrate all of these things. And one of the base things, which I would love for every kid your age or younger, is to know like there needs to be a consistent thought, a lifestyle choice in your brain that like if I do these things, even though they seem monotonous or even if they don't seem like grandiose or big or like my soul's mission, right? It is you have to have this anchor that feels good, right? And I know as a therapist, I can help someone do that emotionally, right? I can help them sort of create this invisible boundary that doesn't get disturbed, but I still have to go work out. I still have to, think about what I'm doing. And it does affect our mental and emotional health. And that's another thing that I love about Knot Therapy is I know that you integrate, like, go take a deep breath. Like you don't get into their egos and like try to necessarily like wrestle with their egos. You're like, there's 5 things you could do today that 6 months from now, you'd be like, oh, that really helped.
Yeah.
So I do think that's a big difference too, or a bridge, right? Like, okay, my kid went to therapy or they did all these things, but now they need someone not nagging at them like their parent, right? But like somebody who's like, no, dude, I actually know this works. I have your experience. Yeah.
I would say too, like the thing that we really just have noticed, not first with myself, but then in Knot Therapy is, therapy is great for uncovering a lot of that emotional stuff that you're talking about, but then you're aware of it. but you're not taking action to like make it better. And so, for us, our model is really, you have therapy maybe once a week, twice a week, but a lot happens in between the time that you meet with your therapist Monday and then a week from them on the next Monday. And so what are you doing in between that time to like implement the things you learned in therapy to move forward with your life? And so for us, we offer a 7-day-a-week model where we're talking to our clients on a daily basis and doing it in their life. And so kind of like you're talking about, when something happens and they're struggling in the moment, like being able to call your mentor and call your coach and say, hey, I'm kind of spiraling in class. I got this big test, and someone to be able to, kind of be that good angel on your shoulder, say like, okay, well, let's do this right now. And then text me after and tell me how you're feeling. And so you're actually helping them take action, so that we tell them it's okay to slip up, but we're not going to allow you to fall down. Right. And so if we're able to take action on those things. And then I always tell my clients, like, a good day turns into a good week turns into a good month, but a bad day doesn't mean it's a bad week, and a bad day doesn't mean it's a bad life. And so for me, it's just really about those day-to-day inputs and having someone that's a little further along the road than you that can say, hey, I totally know what you've been through. And we always tell our clients our stories. But like, I really do understand, and this is what worked for me. And we're always changing things too. Like, we're not just going to say like, this is the framework to success and this is the framework to live the life that you want. It's more just like, what do you think the framework is? And then let's just like take it day by day and tweak things here and there until we find the rhythm that works for you during this time period that we're in right now.
Yeah. So last question I want to ask you is, I know that some of your egoic, habits have served you, right? Like creating community, right? Knowing the positivity of that sense of belonging, and that the ego can, and certainly be of service, right? In that way. What have you had to unlearn from your ego as far as taking all these chances? I mean, you're still taking chances as an entrepreneur, and I'm sure your ego steps in. So what are you unlearning from that ego from your childhood?
Yeah, I think just a lot of the self-centeredness, just being a lot more empathetic. I think with, the amount of times where I'm working with a client and it's something that I used to do, and being able to lead with empathy in those situations. Also just like taking responsibility for my actions, I think is another big thing, because for so long, I didn't think about how I would affect others, and, the emotional toll I was causing on my parents and my siblings. And so, I've spent a lot of time just like repairing those relationships. And I think too, just for me, in the way I was living, it was such like a chase the high, chase the high, chase the high, and just really slowing down and going at my own pace, and really allowing life to happen through me and not to me has been one of the biggest things that I've had to rewire in my brain.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. How do people find you guys?
Yeah, it's nottherapycoaching.com. And just to give a brief overview, we offer a peer-to-peer mentorship, life coaching business model for teens and young adults who are, like I said, either about to go to rehab or a treatment facility. They're in that failure to launch phase. Maybe they dropped out of college, or they're like living somewhere and just can't get a job. And then also that big transition phase. It's really about helping our clients through the ups and downs of life with daily support and someone that can really relate to their experience. So would love to connect with anyone. And also, if there's a parent listening to this, we're always happy to just talk to parents or talk to a young adult, just because, we view that one great mentor can shift the trajectory of a young person's life.
Yeah. And I can verify that you are willing to have complimentary sessions with people. I know that. And I think you're on LinkedIn under Colin McDonald.
Yeah.
Right?
Colin McDonald, Not Therapy. And on our website
Instagram,
too.
I think.
Instagram, Not Therapy Coaching. And also too, on our website, we have tons of other podcasts and testimonials. And so just so you know that I'm not just on here making up stuff.
Yeah. And you guys can sometimes share a newsletter that even someone who passively wants to learn.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, we got a blog on the website too.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Colin. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Wynn.